This is a story that my grandpa told me quite a few times as I was growing up. He originally lived in Africa, specifically in South Africa, in a rather remote village. It wasn't until he was older that he moved away to the United States and then had my mother. He used to tell me lots of stories from where he was born, mostly funny stories about friends and family and such, and I loved to listen. I loved to learn about the place. This is the only story that he ever told me that was scary and that he swore is 100% true. I don't know if I believe it myself, at least not entirely. I've tried to do research, but I could never really find any real record of it. The first two times he told this story to me, I was probably a little bit too young and I got really scared. He told me the story one more time when I was an adult, and it really caught my attention, actually. Let me tell the story from my grandpa's first-person perspective to make it easier to understand. This happened to me when I was growing up. I must have been around 13 or 14 years old at the time. The entire village would wake up early to tend to animals and begin the day's work. I had a lot of responsibilities from a young age, so I was awake as soon as sunlight started to rise. It was a strange day from the first second that I woke up, because I woke up to a crowd of people gathered around outside and just murmuring amongst themselves. I got up and went to look and see what all of the commotion was all about. There was barely a sliver of sunlight in the sky, but I could make out something in the distance, the shadow of something pretty high up in the sky. I couldn't make it out fully at first, but I realized pretty quickly that it was a plane. I had not seen many in my life before that time, so I was amazed. It was just a small, one-person aircraft. For the life of me, I wouldn't be able to tell you what kind. It was one with just the one hatch, like a bubble, covering the person. I think they have a mask to breathe in there, but I could be wrong. Anyway, it very quickly began to come into view, and when it did, I realized that there was more than one. 3 of them actually passed by overhead. Being the stupid, naive kid that I was, I got really excited, thinking that they were so cool. So I started jumping up and down and waving my arms back and forth as if to say hello. I could barely see the man in the cockpit, but once he passed by overhead, we noticed that he had dropped something to the ground. Something metal hit the dirt with a thud, and before long, smoke started to appear out of it. It was like a red or pink color, if I recall. People were pretty scared and jumped back because we had no idea what it was. At the time, we didn't know what it could do or if it could hurt us, but in retrospect, as a much older man, it was very clearly some kind of smoke indicator, something clear and vibrant to target. The 2 other planes passing by dropped similar things behind us into the village. I could see the smoke billowing out from behind me. The pink and reddish smoke, it was covering nearly the entire village. You could see it clearly from miles. You couldn't miss it. By the time that these things were dropped, we noticed a bigger shadow in the sky. There was a big plane, a really big one. Not a commercial one that would carry people. Something big that was clearly meant for carrying cargo. Some people had run off to hide by this point. Mothers had taken their children back to the houses in order to calm them down, but a lot of people stayed. They were curious. I certainly was. I just wanted to know what was going on. Part of me thought that one of them might land to say hello, or maybe even drop supplies for us to help us out, but that never happened. Once this cargo plane was towering over us high in the sky, something opened up. Some kind of compartment in the plane or what have you, and it released what looked to me at the time a cloud of pure blackness. This is what I saw descending on everyone. This thick black cloud that was falling rapidly, and by this point, everyone was running. because we had no idea what it was. It looked scary. But it didn't stop. The cargo plane was carpeting the entire village. No matter where you ran, you couldn't escape whatever this was. And when it started to get closer and closer to the ground, I started to hear a buzzing sound. It was so loud, I could feel it inside my head, inside my body. I could feel the buzz shaking my bones, and it sounded angry. It sounded like a swarm of something. And it was. It was a gigantic mass of insects that had been dropped from that plane. I don't know if it was mosquitoes or wasps or bees or something. It was something like that. I managed to flee back into my house to hide just about, but I couldn't help but watch. I was just peeking through the little holes in the netting that was covering up my window. I just watched as people fell to the ground and began becoming covered head to toe by these things, as if they were wrapped up and mummified by these bugs. And once they were done, they moved on to the next person, but they didn't kill the person that they wrapped up. These things, I'm not sure what they did. One man, once these bugs had left him, I saw him become just so angry. He started running really quickly. He ran faster than I had seen someone run before, and he caught up to another man. He practically dove to reach him and caught him by the legs and pulled him to the ground. All of a sudden, he was on top of this man, and he just started attacking him. I saw him grab the man with two hands around his throat and just start choking him. And when the man on the floor started to fight back, the crazed man on top of him just started to headbutt him over and over again. He did this until the both of them were just a bloody mess with unrecognizable features. Even after the man on the floor was clearly dead, he just kept on punching and biting at him. I saw him bite down and tear off an ear like a dog would, shaking his head from side to side. He did this for minutes on end before screaming and trying to catch someone else. And at one point I saw him just collapse to the floor and start shaking. It looked like his heart just gave out and like his body could not power his movements anymore. There was a woman from the village that I knew who ran with me. She hid inside of my house with me. I don't know what happened. I think one of the bugs must have pricked her a little before we reached the house. She was old enough to be my mom, but she wasn't my mom. My parents were outside of the village at this time, and I can't remember what for. I will never forget the horrifying sight that I saw. She was in the corner of the room, cradling her legs, and after a couple of minutes, she starts itching her face. At first, it's just a regular itch, but then she starts to do it more and more, until it gets really aggressive, and she won't stop itching, and she just can't stop. I tried to go over to her to ask what was wrong and see if I could help. I said that I had some cold water that she could use for the itch, but she just started screaming. She screamed at me to shut up and to go away. She sounded angry and scared at the same time. Her face was turning red. I could see that bits of her skin was starting to flake off and clump underneath her fingernails. It was like she had bad sunburn that was causing peeling, but it did not stop. I watched as more and more skin started to come off of her face. It started with little bits of the top layer of skin, until eventually, masses of skin were just coming off. She was screaming in agony. I remember her screaming, help me," while staring directly into my eyes, but she just wouldn't stop. And at one point, I remember seeing so much of her skin gone that I could see bone peering out from underneath. And I just covered my eyes and cowered away into the corner of my room until she stopped making noise. I just couldn't bear the sight anymore. Even when it was all over, I didn't dare turn around and look back at her body. That buzzing did not stop for hours. On and off for that entire day. I would hear people screaming these death screams before eventually being cut off. It wasn't until well past midday that the buzzing was gone, and I started to hear something outside. I heard vehicles, and then I heard boots hitting the dirt. And then all of a sudden, I hear these gruff, manly voices barking orders at people in the village, telling people to leave their homes with their hands up and that they will be spared. They said that if they complied, then no one will be hurt at all. I did as they said. I left through the window, making sure I didn't turn to see the woman. The second that I stepped outside, I had a gun pointed at me, and I heard so much shouting. I was told to keep my distance. I was put on my knees in a line with lots of other people in my village. I remember it so clearly. These soldiers with guns, they would go down the line. They were asking people questions, checking their pulse, checking their temperature, taking their blood, etc. And sometimes, after asking these questions, after doing all of this, I didn't see, but I would hear gunshots. Most of the time, I just kept my eyes closed, praying that I would not be next. I just spent most of the time sobbing and praying that my parents would come back and save me, praying that God would save me. The only time I turned around was when I heard shouting and screaming, followed by rapid gunfire. This man, he had shambled out of one of the houses. He looked horrible. He looked like some kind of grotesque creature. His head had bulged and had become like 2 or 3 times the size, to the point where his neck did not exist anymore. It's like his body parts, they grew and just melded into each other. He had all of these little growths along his shoulders and lumps on his face at random points. He couldn't even walk properly. He had to drag one leg behind himself and do almost a little hop to keep on moving. He did not say a single word to the soldiers. He just kept moving towards them as best as he could move and making this horrible wheezing sound. I turned around once the gunfire started. I was shaking so badly. When it was eventually my turn in line, they asked me so many questions. They asked me if I had any wounds on my body, if I was bitten or pricked, or if I had any marks. I told them no. They asked me if I had been near anyone else who had, or been exposed to any blood of any other people. I lied and I told them no. I thought that if I told them about the woman in my house, they would kill me for sure. They took my blood and my temperature, and they asked me lots more questions about my family, about what I did that day, about what I saw, about who I thought was in the planes, etc. I just gave them honest answers about where my parents were, about how I didn't recognize the planes or any people. And, thankfully for me, they just moved on. I kneeled in that dirt until the sun went down, and eventually, I got stuffed in a van along with some other people and taken somewhere. I'm not sure where I went. I never got to see outside. At one point, they put me to sleep and I don't remember much after that. Aside from drifting in and out of consciousness and being in a different room each time, I think they took me to some kind of hospital. I remember a bright white room and people standing over me. And when I next remember being awake, I was back in my village. I was back in my home. I was back in my own bed. There was no woman inside my house anymore. My parents were back home. There were no bodies around the village at all. There was no buzzing and there were no bugs. But nobody talked about what happened. It was forbidden. If you ever mentioned it after that day, people would slap you and hit you and shame you. They would do this until no one spoke of it ever again. It was only a few years after that my parents, they came into some money. They never mentioned how or what they did to get this money, but they got so much money that they moved me. They moved me to America, and the rest is history. That was the only time in my life I had ever been so afraid. Trying to get any more details from my grandfather after this was pretty difficult. He couldn't really recall much else, and didn't really know what was going on. Like I said, I was never able to find any information about this. Does anyone have any idea about what he was talking about? Or was this some kind of South African urban legend, like a tall tale to tell kids and scare them? Or maybe was it just the delusions of an old man? The story, when he used to tell it, it used to seriously shake me to my core. Me telling it here like this, it doesn't really do it justice. There were so many extra details that he added in that I can't fully remember. I really hope that this wasn't true. If that truly happened to my grandfather, that would scare me to death. Ask any RDC that was locked on RTC during COVID. There was some wild shit that people heard and saw. 2 stories, both of which take place during the COVID lockdowns on RTC. One night, while about 10 of us males were asleep in the center compartment, I got woken up around 0300 by Division, marching outside, singing cadence, but it was a cadence that I'd never heard before, and it was loud. I could hear the RDC directing the division and making calls. What makes this weird is that marching cadence can't be called after sunset, unless there's special circumstances, like battle stations. 0300 cadence calling, no chance. Also, we were in ship number 9, and the traffic pattern that they were matching would have led them into the dumpsters or base fence. That direction is where the oldest parts of RTC are. The other part that was weird was the next morning, a couple females on the other side of the building reported hearing it too. Ghost division or something, must have been. Still, during COVID, I worked at the quarantine ship, monitoring sick recruits. I woke up and was getting ready for work when I noticed my wife looked like she had not slept at all and looked a bit shook. After I asked, she told me that she had seen a demon or a dark cloud-like figure that had white burning eyes with embers coming off of them in the middle of the night. She said it moved across the room and into our master bathroom. She said that she did not wake me up because she was much too scared to say anything and was hoping that it would just go away. Apparently, it did. I thought it was weird, but I dismissed it mostly. On the way to base, it was super foggy. Not too significant, but creepy. When I got to the ship, the off-going watch told me that he had been hearing footsteps running down the P-way behind him. He was still on edge from the night. He looked like he was very ready to get out of there. There was nothing behind him but the galley entrance hallway, and said he had heard some whispering in his ear and thought it was one of us messing with him. He and the other guy were the only ones in the building besides the recruits. They absolutely would have noticed someone leaving a compartment. Then they both told me and the other watchstander about a crazy interaction while roving one of the compartments. They said that while in a compartment, they were walking through the head as normal, and they were caught way off guard when they noticed 3 recruits chanting and speaking in a weird language, performing a seance of some sort. They yelled at them to stop being weird and to get the hell back to sleep. The 2 of them snapped out of it and later claimed that they had no recollection of what happened. The main guy, the leader of the seance, he was calm and creepy and just went straight to his rack without saying anything at all. Naturally, me and the other oncoming watchstander wanted to go and talk to this kid and see what the hell this was all about. We called him into the fishbowl and asked him what the hell was going on and why he was in the head performing a seance with 2 recruits. This kid was weird, but he didn't give crazy vibes, just odd. Anyway, he told us that his dad was a preacher and that's how he learned to repel demons and other spirits. He said that there were 2 demons in that building and he was able to repel one by himself, but that it cost him 3 years off of his life. Then he told us that the second demon was a blood demon, and he needed help from the 2 other recruits to repel it, but still, he was not able to do it. He said that there was most likely a blood diagram somewhere in the building, and he needed to find it to perform a blood ceremony so that he could move it. The entire time he was telling us this, we were extremely skeptical and basically just listening for our own entertainment. This is where things get even more strange. The recruit told us that the blood diagram was in an in-between type of space, but above all and in the building. The recruits have no idea that there's a maintenance floor, let alone the way to access it. But what really got to me was that when we asked him to describe the demon that he cast out, he told me that it was a dark, cloud-like figure with orange burning eyes that had embers coming off of them, almost exactly the same that my wife had described earlier that morning. It gave me chills, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. How could they both have seen the same demon figure? By far, the creepiest experience I've ever had. I remember a few summers ago when my wife and I decided to take the kids down to Florida for a week so they could finally visit Disney World. We planned to spend 3 days at Disney World, with a day on either side for the grown-ups to do their own thing. We spent some time walking around Orlando, seeing the sights, and baking in the Florida heat. My wife was corralling the kids while I trailed behind, trying not to pass out from eating my body weight in pork, bread, and cheese. At one point, my wife needed to use the bathroom, so I was left in charge of the kids while she went off to find a place that wouldn't make her open her purse just to pee. I will admit, this is where I fell short as a dad, because I found a bench, sat down, and told the kids to just stay where I could see them, and then I shut my eyes and started sunbathing. I was about to doze off when I jerked awake, suddenly worried about the kids. I got up, looked around, and saw my son halfway down the street, talking to some guy dressed as Mickey Mouse. I knew Disney characters sometimes showed up outside the parks, but seeing one in downtown Orlando was weird. I was mostly just relieved that the kids had not vanished, because that would have ruined more than just our vacation. As I walked toward Mickey, I realized something was off about him. The Mickeys in the park are always super animated, but this one was just standing there, barely moving. My kids were dancing around him, excited, but Mickey just stared at him with these big, lifeless eyes. I made a dad joke in my head about Mickey Mouse taking a few Mickey pills. As I got closer, I noticed the costume was all wrong. Not just in shape and color, but it was filthy and covered in stains. I get that those costumes are hard to clean, but this one looked seriously gross, and I dreaded to think what it smelled like inside the thing. I figured the guy in the suit must be down on his luck, because no one with options would ever wear that thing in the Florida heat. The kids kept running circles around him, and I thought he was just exhausted or had heat stroke. I reached into my wallet to give him a 20, but when I tried to hand it over, he just stared at me. The head turned toward me in a way that was way creepier than I expected, with those big black eyes just staring me down. I awkwardly tried to give him the money, but he tilted his head at me like something out of a horror movie. I put the 20 back in my wallet, not wanting to offend him further, and called the kids back because their mom was probably wondering where we were. The kids begged to play with Mickey a little bit longer, but Mickey just kept staring at them, making me super uncomfortable. I used my stern dad voice to insist that they come back, threatening to tell their mom if they did not listen to me. As they did, Mickey reached out to grab my 7-year-old son, and that was the last straw for me. I stepped up and told the guy he had no right to touch my kids, especially not in that suit. Mickey just stared at me in silence, not making a single sound the whole entire time. I took both kids by the hand, and they were getting upset because Dad was being mean to Mickey Mouse, and Mickey Mouse was not acting normal either. I apologized to the guy for being curt, then tried to turn it into a teachable moment for the kids about not letting strangers touch them or talk to them. As we walked away, I looked over my shoulder and saw Mickey still staring at me. somehow looking even creepier than before. That night, I couldn't sleep at all, because the Florida humidity was brutal, and our motel room's air conditioner picked that night to stop working. The kids' room AC was fine, but ours was useless, so I got up and sat at the kitchenette, drinking a glass of mostly ice, trying to cool down. We had a flight home the next day, so I needed to be sharp and not lose our boarding passes or anything. Our motel was all single-story bungalows in a horseshoe shape, and our unit faced the highway. I walked over to the windows to take one last look at the Florida night, thinking about why people love vacationing there. As I looked through the blinds, I saw something that made my jaw drop. Out by the highway, silhouetted by the streetlights, was the unmistakable shape of Mickey Mouse with the big ears and oversized hands. I actually said, "No fucking way," out loud, as I realized the knockoff Mickey Mouse from Orlando had somehow found out where we were staying. I still have no idea how he figured it out, but the only thing I can think is that without the suit, he could have looked like anyone and just followed us back. Since we left Florida the next day, and I only talked to the cops once, I never really got any answers about how he found us. I rushed back to the kitchenette to grab a knife, which might sound like an overreaction, but I was terrified. When you're a dad, you just can't take chances with your kid's safety, so I wasn't about to face whatever was happening with just my fists. Knife in hand, I rushed back to the window, but the Mickey figure was gone. I say no one was there, not nothing, because lying in the parking lot closer to our room was the entire Mickey Mouse costume. I stared at it in terror, realizing the guy had stripped off the costume in seconds and was now nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, the guy appeared right in front of the window and slammed his head against the glass so hard I thought it would break. I nearly had a heart attack and screamed, which woke up my wife and kids. I told my wife to get in the kids' room, lock the door, and call the cops, which she did after a few panicked questions. I guess the window was security glass, because the guy, who was completely naked by the way, could not break it, no matter what he tried. I waved the knife at him and shouted that the cops were on the way, which seemed to get his attention more than anything else. He switched his focus to the door, trying to bash it open, while I rushed to the kids' room to check if the cops were coming. My wife said yes, and by the time I got back to the window, the banging had stopped and the Mickey suit was gone. I watched the parking lot until I saw the blue flashing lights, and only then did I finally breathe again. I gave my statement to the cops, told them about the earlier encounter, and figured it would be easy to find a naked guy missing a Mickey Mouse suit. But we were not there for much longer, and the next day, we flew back home to Maine. I called the Orlando police later on to see if there were any updates, but there had not been a single arrest related to the incident. They questioned some Disney cast members, but nothing ever came of it, and that's really where the story just ends. The guy found us, terrorized us, and then we left Florida. I guess I will go back someday when the kids are older and don't really care about Disneyland, but definitely not anytime soon, and definitely not to downtown Orlando. So, when this happened to me, I was on a family trip in Oregon. We are heading to whatever lake is up there that people like a lot. It's around a 2-hour drive or so. There is 2-lane traffic going down one side, one direction, another 2-lane road going the opposite way, back where we came from. In the middle of the two roads was a small orchard of trees that had to have been barely 6 feet at best. I could see the road through the orchard. Similar orchards existed like a frame on the outside of both roads. It was tree line, orchard, road, tree line. It was standstill traffic. It's clear and sunny. It's a clear, sunny midday. We are suddenly all hearing this really strange noise. My family reacts first. I, for some reason, wrote off whatever I was hearing as an animatronic. I guess it makes sense. They're playing an automatic, blood-curdling roar right next to the car. You know, to scare the birds away from the orchard. And on. That isn't a fucking speaker. Something big and loud and unpleased had to have been in the middle of the orchard. Everybody went dead silent, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. It sounded like a gigantic ape, mixed with a T-Rex, an arm's length away from our car. I could not see shit. No strangers were really reacting as far as we saw. We were still stuck in traffic. That was some shit. Everybody spends a good 15 minutes talking about it, and then nobody ever speaks of it ever again. You could see right through the clearings. I still don't get it. These weren't big fruit trees. They were still growing and had no limbs large enough to support whatever thing made that noise, and keeping it completely hidden from view. If whatever this thing was on the tree line, it was far enough away that it should not have been so audibly close. I assume it was Bigfoot, pissed off about not being able to go back across the road because of all of the cars.